Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Surah Bani Israel, chapter 17, and we will cover verses 1 to 8 today, explaining signposts on the path of establishing the system of Deen. These are references, and this is our contact in case there is any query or question regarding this presentation or any of our previous presentations. Recap verses, Surah Nahl 16, 120 to 128. And if you remember, we had finished Surah Nahl in our last presentation on 14th of January. Here the Quran presents before us the model of the messenger Ibrahim, who followed Sirat Mustaqim as defined by Allah's Wahi and became an ummah in himself. Emphasis on the importance of an individual human self. The salient feature of his developed self is that he fully understood Iman and then never associated anyone as a partner in the concept of Allah put forward by Wahi. As a consequence of this, he benefited in this life and is counted among the Salihin in the life of the hereafter, i.e., because he had brought out his latent potentials through salih deeds together with others, his companions on this path. Next, the Quran invites us to follow the path of the millat of Ibrahim, i.e. Deen as a system. And that is very interesting because it is collectively what he did with other companions that is important, because Quran wants us to establish the system of Deen whenever we are present in this life. Then it quotes the example of Jews who failed to follow the path of Wahi, as a result suffered in this life and continue to suffer. Guidance is provided next on the manner in which the message of Allah is to be shared with others. Finally, the Quran recognizes the challenges on this path of Deen and asks us to remain patient and steadfast, and the results will start to appear at some future time. An overview of today's presentation. In the establishment of the system of Deen, a stage may arise where it may be necessary for the Momineen to migrate to another location where more suitable conditions exist, which are conducive to this system. Here the Messenger of Allah is noted to be moving from his present abode, which is Makkah, to Madina in order to shape the system of Allah. Then the Quran presents evidence from the earlier era where the messenger Musa also shaped the system of Deen with the help of Bani Israel under the guidance of the Wahi of Allah. And if we remember, he migrated with Bani Israel to Sinai desert to educate and train Bani Israel. Then another example is quoted of the messenger Nuh to provide assurance to the Momineen that if the Wahi of Allah is followed as per the guidance, then results are bound to materialize at some point in the future. Left the place after the flood. And we had gone through this aspect in Surah Hud in detail. The Quran then refers to the destruction of Bani Israel when they disobeyed the guidance of Wahi, and this is to provide a warning to the followers of the Quran that no one is Allah's favorite. And that is very important, because in the religious domain, people think that they are the favorites, and which is wrong. If we want to be favorite, then we have to follow the values of the Quran. Whoever follows his laws earns a prosperous life as per the law of requital. Then we are informed that when the path of Wahi is followed, it brings glad tidings, and when we transgress this, we will turn our life into hell in this world, and there is nothing in the hereafter. Let us go to the first verse of today's presentation, 17:1. Striving on Allah's path becomes part of his scheme. Subhanallazi asra bi abdihi laylam min al masjid al harami ila al masjid al aqsa allazi barakna hawlahu linuriyahu min ayatina innahu huwa samiul basir. Among the intrigues of the opponents towards which attention is previously drawn, and if you remember, we covered this verse under Surah Nahl 1-7. The last scheme among these was to quietly kill the messenger. And this is the worst thing which opponents of Islam do, that they want to kill those people who are inviting them to the message of Allah. But The schemes of Allah are so greatly superior and lofty that these simply cannot be imagined or conceived by them. Therefore, according to his scheme, he took his servant, that is the messenger of Allah, from Baitul Haram, that is Makkah, at night to the vast land of Madina so that he could establish the system of Allah at this far off distant place. We have made that location and its surroundings very bountiful. Its environment is very favorable for this heavenly revolution. All this has been carried out for this purpose, that Allah makes those things manifest which are being promised for all this time. And we should look at this verse 20-23. Surely he is all seeing and all hearing, therefore his every decision is based on knowledge and hikmat. Verse 17:1, setting the scene for the scheme of Allah for the establishment of Deen. The surah is named Bani Israel. There is another name also given to this surah, Asra, but I have used this Bani Israel. With reference to the mention of this verse in 17:2, here the Quran has drawn some comparison with the striving of the last messenger and his companions with the pattern followed by the messenger Musa. Secondly, as will appear later, Jews were also residing in Madina, to which Rasulullah was migrating as mentioned in this verse. This is an important aspect which we should keep in mind when we go through these verses. Here the Quran refers to the great event of migration, which is called Hijrat, by the messenger from Makkah to Madina as part of his second phase of establishment of the system of Deen. The symbols of Masjid al-Haram and Masjid al-Aqsa, that is far off mosque, are used to point to these two physical signs which existed at that time. So it is important that we should not concentrate too much on these geographical localities, but we should concentrate on the purpose for which Quran is asking us to pay attention, because that is the purpose is the system of Deen, so that the man-made system can be replaced and the benefits associated with the system of Deen are enjoyed by mankind. Those who had accepted Islam in Medina, and it's called Al-Yatrib as well, and were well settled there, called Ansar by the Quran, had invited the messenger and his companions in Makkah to migrate there as the conditions there were favorable and better for the system of Deen. A lot Quran has left to our imagination to figure it out and relate it to the world in which we live. We all know that if we have to go to some other place, we prefer that somebody knows us over there. And those of us who are migrants to different countries, they know that they will prefer to go to a place where somebody is already known to them or some relations of theirs is already residing there. A stage had reached in Mecca where the locals, seeing the success of Islam, planned to kill the messenger. The Quran has referred to this aspect in verse 940. And let us look at the next slide. Few more comments. Verse 940. I'll go through its translation. We can look at the details of this verse in any copy of the Quran. If you help not, for Allah did help him. And this is what Allah is letting Momineen know, that if you do not give your best for the establishment of this system to the messenger of Allah, then other opportunities will become created, because Allah's message has to get through. The system of Deen has to be established. If you help not, for Allah did help him when the kuffar drove him out. He had no more than one companion. The two were in the cave, and he said to his companion, have no fear, for Allah is with us. And we can see over here, La tahzan inna Allah ma'ana. And we know what huzan means. This is an extreme kind of anxiety and grief. Then Allah sent down his peace upon him and strengthened him with forces which you saw not, and humbled to the depths the word of the kuffar. But the word of Allah is exalted to the heights, for Allah is Aziz and Hakim. So these two attributes are extremely powerful and tell us that if we strive on this path, then opportunities will become created on this path as we keep progressing on it patiently as well as steadfastly. We have gone through these aspects previously as well, but it is good to remind ourselves. Where did Allah take him? Allazi barakna hawlahu. Here, the condition of the environment of the next location is outlined. It encompasses both sustenance and development, i.e., both physical aspects and self-development. So what Quran is saying is that where he's moving now is potentially such an environment will become created where these things will grow and will become successful and Momineen will get power. The next part of the verse points to another important sign, i.e. لِنُرِيَهُ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا. And we know Nuriyahu means looking through our own eyes, something which is evidence-based and we can see physically. Starting with La, then future benefits of this move are highlighted, and they call it Lam Nafi. And these will be visible with human sight, not something which is not visible. Similar wording has appeared in 2023, لِنُرِيَكَ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا الْكُبْرَى. And this is in relation to the messenger of Allah, Hazrat Musa, in order that we show you the messenger of Musa our great signs. So if we correlate and cross-reference these verses with other verses in the Quran, then the matter becomes crystal clear. Further reflections on this verse. Here we need to be clear that this verse has nothing to do with the prevalent belief in sectarian Islam that this is about a mirage or ascension to the heavens by the last messenger, i.e. some kind of miracle. As we know, the Quran has categorically dismissed the possibility of any miracle and has repeatedly emphasized the use of rational thinking and reasoning in order to understand its verses. Everything in Allah's word follows His laws. I've tried to remain very brief on this because this is not really an issue for the student of the Quran, because Quran is about solving the problems on this planet. It is not about getting convinced through any kind of a miracle. And that is important. We should keep in mind and not go in that direction, trying to figure out that what does it mean if there was any miracle at that time which is associated with this verse. The fact is that no system in the human world can take shape which does not involve the use of the human intellect and reasoning process. And we know that Quran is asking us to use the extreme limits of our intellect at any point in time, because once we use it, then it keeps expanding and we rise in steps higher and higher, and our vision becomes wider and wider. We can see things which we couldn't see previously. All man-made systems utilize these human attributes, which are, for example, i.e. intellect, emotions, desires, reasoning potentials, physical abilities. Whichever nation uses these more effectively, it reaps more benefit and uses it for the exploitation of others. And a very simple example is that if one is born in a let's say third world country where science is not well developed, and if he or she has interest in science, then they will have to move to another country which is more developed than the place in which they are living. This verse sets the scene for the establishment of the system of Deen and points to a very important link in striving on the path of Allah, i.e. migration in the cause of Allah. Go to a land where there is the possibility of establishing the system of Deen. So we have to be on the lookout as well, that as we are progressing in enhancing our understanding in the Quran, we should also see that where possibly we get better conditions where we might be able to start this system, and there is no harm in looking for that while we are making an effort wherever we are. This verse helps to signpost the path of Momineen. This verse has superb glad tidings for those who decide to become Momineen and as a result come together through the unity of their hearts. The messenger and his companion are absolutely convinced that the campaign of Islam is not taking off to the next level unless they migrate to Medina. And there is a plenty of evidence for that in the Quran, and I'm sure we will go through it as we progress through our understanding and study of the Quran. The hardship and pain of this migration is mitigated by the higher purpose for which they are making this journey by night. If we are mentally prepared while we are studying the Quran that if need arises, then we will be willing to move, then that means our self will multiply, our self will develop. It will understand that as and when opportunity comes, we will move to that piece of land where there are better opportunities for establishing the system of Deen. This also points to the fact that for the system of Deen, there is the need to have a geographical location where there is total freedom to practice the laws and values of the Quran. The purpose of masjid also becomes clear, i.e., a center of activity for the system of Deen. Because masjid serves as a headquarter, because we know that the root of the word used in this term is related to subservience to the laws of Allah, as these are revealed in the Quran. At the end, two divine attributes of Huwa Samiul Basir, and Sami means hearing and Basir means seeing, provide reassurance that since this task is being performed on Allah's behalf, hence His presence will provide strength to the human psyche. He does not leave the Momineen alone. And we can look at this verse where Quran says, Kala la takhafa innani ma'akuma asma'u wa ara. Again, same two words are used here, that Allah says that I hear as well as I see. Allah said, not to fear, as surely I am with you and I hear and see. And it is in relation to meeting of Hazrat Musa with Pharaoh. Next verse 17:2, the book of guidance was also given to Bani Israel via the messenger Musa. وَآتَيْنَا مُوسَى الْكِتَابَ وَجَعَلْنَاهُ هُدًى لِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ أَلَّا تَتَّخِذُوا مِن دُونِي وَكِيلًا. In relation to the heavenly invitation for revolution, migration is not anything new. Such an event was faced by nearly every messenger, and the messenger Musa taking his people out of Egypt is such a famous event that its details are known to everyone. This is also the same kind of migration. And there are plenty of YouTube videos if you want to look at it, Exodus, and these are covered, and of course these are taken from Bible. We had also bestowed Musa with the code of guidance in the same way, and had made it a beacon of guidance for Bani Israel, and had told them not to take anything else other than this code as their custodian and to maintain complete trust in it. Bani Israel was asked to obey the laws of Allah. Immediately after mentioning the migration of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Quran has drawn our attention to the past event of Bani Israel. Under the direction of the messenger Musa, who arrived with Wahi to help them escape the slavery of Pharaoh. Because slavery, slavery by another human being is unacceptable to the Quran. And Quran wants us that we should be able to use our choice and intent freely. And that is, we should keep our focus as well, because that is how we understand the Quran, that why is Quran giving us a different system from the man-made system. This aspect is covered in a number of other verses of the Quran. Ultimately, when Bani Israel followed the guidance of Allah, they became established in the land and prospered for some time. Here reference is made to providing them with guidance, but this journey of theirs was not an easy one. And Musa and his brother Harun struggled with them even after extracting them successfully from the clutches of Pharaoh. It's an important point which I have noted over here from the Quran, that when people stay in slavery under colonization for a long time, their psyche does change. And people who want to help them change their psyche, they have to have a lot of patience, lot of tolerance of working with them. And they have to be very forgiving as well, because these people will make a lot of mistakes. They were informed clearly through the Wahi of Allah to follow the laws of Allah and to place complete trust in the code of laws provided through the book revealed to their messenger. The Quran has also mentioned this in order to apprise us that Jews were residing in Medina, and this will help to see the context, as these will create issues with the Muslims over there. Now, next verse 17:3, story of mankind is one continuous stream of events, and this is based on the functioning of the law of requital. Zurriyata man hamalna ma'a nuhin innahu kana abdan shakura. In order to create conviction in this matter, the schemes of Allah are guarantors of peace and protection. We had told them that you are descendants of those people whom we had saved from the storm by having them carried in the ark made by Nuh. The messenger Nuh was our very obedient and dutiful servant. Therefore, if you will also adopt obedience and dutifulness in the same way, then you too will become released from the punishment of the people of Pharaoh. This was the aim of migration. Further reflections on this verse 17:3. In this verse, if the addressee is taken to be Bani Israel, then they are being informed that they need to remind themselves as the successors of the people of Nuh, who were saved after the great flood and the destruction of those who disobeyed the laws of Allah. It is important to keep reminding ourselves in order to remain on the path of Wahi. The verse can also be applied to the Jamaat Momineen to remain aware of their past. And it's equally applicable to us as well as students of the Quran, and of the importance of treading on the path defined and signposted by the Quran. Here the Quran has also noted one salient feature of the character of the messenger Nuh, innahu kana abdan shakura. We have gone through this word shakura, and which essentially means that how to bring out our best, that whatever potentials we have, these should be brought out positively in the outer world and get the best results for our efforts in this life. He knew how to get the best from his efforts on this path of Allah using the guidance of Wahi. Next point is, he understood the importance of Rububiyat and made efforts to establish the system which the rich and powerful opposed. And we have gone through his story in Surah Hud in detail. However, he never abandoned the path of Wahi, and here the Quran has reiterated this by saying that he was the servant of Allah whose efforts on the path of Allah were in line with the guidance of Wahi. And this is to reassure us that if we stick to this path, then we will also meet success the way these messengers met in the past. Next verse 17:4, providing warning about evil conduct and its consequences. وَقَدَيْنَا إِلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ فِي الْكِتَابِ لَا تُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَّتَيْنِ وَلَا تَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا. Together with this, we had also informed Bani Israel in the Torah that after achieving release from the tyranny of Pharaoh, you will contravene the laws of Allah and you will cause great destructions in the land twice and will resort to great transgression. The consequence of this will be destruction and ruin for you yourself. Further elaboration of this verse. This verse needs a reflection from the historical perspective as well as what is going on in the world in 2024. Here Allah has noted that the people of Bani Israel were warned that if they fail to follow the guidance of Wahi, they will bring two major calamities on themselves. Not once but twice. In between, of course, they will get warnings about following wrong paths as well. And we have gone through this aspect that before the final destruction or final ruin of any nation, there are always plenty of warnings prior to that. And if these people do not mend their way and keep following the same path of destruction, then ultimately it arrives from a direction they may not even think about it. And we can see that happening right in front of our eyes in today's world, that things are getting bad to worse. And criminality again across the world is increasing with every passing day. As referred to in the Quran, i.e., all nations get a warning before their destructions. These two events should not be taken as if these were meant to arrive, come what may. Not at all. And this took me quite a long time to go through these verses and cross-check with other verses of the Quran as well. Because it looks, if we read it from translations, it looks as if these two events were meant to be like that. They were not meant to be like that. What all Quran is doing is warning them about it, that you can avert it if you wish by following the path of Allah, because human choice is never curtailed. Nobody is going to take away our choice. We make our own decisions, whether individual or collective. Bani Israel could easily avoid these had they kept on the righteous path. As per historical accounts, whatever are available, two major events occurred. First, around 599 BC, if we Google it, we will see that the dates are quite varying. It starts from, in my reading, they start from 580 to maybe even after 600 or something like that. But dates are unimportant. What is important is that this event did take place. When the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and the Jews suffered a horrendous destruction. However, they recovered subsequently from this and again flourished. The second destruction came at the hands of the Romans in 70 CE. However, this second destruction dispersed them, and they never acquired a state and stability as a nation and were termed as wandering Jews. And we should keep it in mind, this is up to the initial era of Islam. One may think that what about their state as of today? About this, the Quran has mentioned that they may acquire some stability on the back of some support. For example, we can look at the verse 3:1-1-2. But their former glory as a people will not return unless they follow the Wahi of Allah, which is now in the Quran. Because no nation, as far as this life is concerned, no nation is consigned to hell or into hardships forever. If they understand the law of requital and if they come back to the Quran, they can always become successful in the word and make their life free from fear and huzn. These aspects need to be analyzed in the light of the transformation of the human psyche, i.e., there are only two types of psyches in the human world. Either we have a Quranic psyche or we have non-Quranic psyche. And we know from the Quran that Quran broadly categorizes human beings into two categories, that is Hizbul Shaitan and Hizbullah. These are not derogatory terms, but these are related to human psyche, the way human beings think. Some reflections on human psyche from this verse. This verse is not some prophecy by the Quran that it was meant to happen like this, not at all. People bring ruin and humiliation on themselves by either remaining ignorant of the laws of Allah or by deliberately going against these laws and following their own unbridled desires. Why I have gone into so much detail to try to figure out that what exactly the Quran is saying over here, because under the sectarian Islam, some kind of prophecies exist where they say as if this is bound to happen. That if some say that, for example, there are going to be something like 72 sects among Muslims, as if this is bound to happen and Allah is going to make these sects and then He is going to unite them. Not at all. We create sects ourselves, we create parties ourselves, we create divisiveness among ourselves, and Quran is asking us not to create this divisiveness. Because divisiveness destroys our potentials. It destroys our ability to live in peace. Another important aspect which we need to study and observe is the way the human psyche behaves and acts without the guidance of the permanent values. And that is important for us as students of the Quran, that permanent values, these exist in the world. Whether we follow them or do not follow them, we will meet the consequences of them. And for example, fire exists. Whether somebody puts his finger into it or not, it will burn whoever puts his finger into it. And similarly, permanent values, whatever we do in the world, the results, the consequences of our deeds will be decided according to these permanent values. If we go against any permanent value, its negative effect will affect our own psyche and, of course, the collective psyche of a nation. Since it follows its own desires, which means that when any physical success is acquired, it starts to think that fortune is on its side, and under the influence of the acquired power, it starts to make serious errors of judgment and never thinks of changing its wrong path, as it does not believe in the law of requital. This aspect is touched in the later part of the verse where it says that they became arrogant. We see the demonstration of such mentalities and decision-making in the world of today. For example, Hitler took his country to total destruction, the effects of which are still staying with Germany, which is under the slavery of the US despite being an economic powerhouse. All this takes place as per physical laws, i.e. domination through physical means. So as students of the Quran, we should also keep in mind that when Quran talks about success, it includes the hereafter. It includes the long-term future benefits, and it includes human self as well. When we look at it from human point of view as a success, then mainly it is restricted to the economic benefit and of course the military might. Further analysis of this verse. First, the verse states that Bani Israel were informed well in time, وَقَدَيْنَا إِلَى Bani Israel, i.e. a warning was provided, and through the Quran, Muslims of today are also well informed. Then it states, Fil Kitab, this can be the book revealed to Musa and also in reference to the law of Allah. Then it states, La tufsidunna fil arde, will resort to creating fasad in the land in which they lived. Fasad not only means creating all kinds of injustices and iniquities, it also includes not carrying out those duties and responsibilities which Allah has invited us as people of the book to perform on His behalf, thus resulting in the fostering of chaos and conflict in the world. So one can say that I'm not creating any problem in the world, but the second question should be, am I following the guidance of Allah? Do I know what is contained in the Quran? Do I know fully that how the Quranic guidance will help us to establish the system of Deen? Being dormant or neutral is not an option according to the Quran. We have to be either on the side of Haqq or Batil. There is no man's land between the two. Next, the verse says, Marrataine, twice, i.e. create this situation through their own conduct in the land. This is before the revelation of the Quran. This is applicable to every nation or people who follow this path. And we will make a very serious mistake if we confine this to Bani Israel only. This is applicable to all nations for all time. And this includes sectarian Muslims as well. Then the verse informs us about the kind of psyche these people had acquired which preceded these disasters, i.e. La ta lunna uluvan kabira. Because what happens is when human beings become egoistic and they become self-centered, and even if they read the Quran, they don't get the gist of it. They never understand that why the Quran is asking them to follow its guidance. And this is the way we are created. We have to overcome these proclivities and tendencies within us. And we have gone over this aspect previously as well. Behaved arrogantly, ignoring and not using the Wahi of Allah as an external criterion. And then this behavior gradually leading them to disaster. We can witness this condition existing among Muslim countries of the world in 2024. I have specifically referred to Muslim countries because it is they who read the Quran day and night. And it is they who are supposed to stand up for Haqq and not to be party of Batil. The effects under the law of requital are termed as the promise of Allah. Next verse. Faiza jaa wado ulahuma basna alaikum ibadallana uli basin shadidin fajasu khilal al diyare wakana wadan maf'ula. Hence, when the first event from these two took place at the time of the invasion by Nebuchadnezzar, that is Babylonians, then, O Bani Israel, we made such people stand up against you who were very powerful and harsh. They entered your dwellings and they searched around for you and got hold of you, and what the law of requital of Allah had stated became fulfilled. Applying to our word in 2024. What is stated in this verse is very much evidence-based in today's world. When the laws of Allah are not obeyed by those who call themselves the people of the book, the Quran, then this is what happens to them through the hands of the powerful tyrannical forces in the world. And those tyrannical forces are always non-Quranic. Here the Quran states that Faiza ja wadu ulahuma. When the time for the first promise arrived, i.e. for the action under the law of requital of Allah, which became due, then what happened is, in the next part, Allah relates this to Himself and states, Ba'athna alaykum ibadallana uli basin shadidin fajasu khilal al diyar. Very powerful in terms of destruction of human beings. Another nation which was very powerful and tyrannical invaded Bani Israel and destroyed them by entering their houses. Just see the language of the Quran. that Allah is allowing this to happen because Allah does not interfere in human affairs, but He does relate it to Himself. Just relate this to what happened in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Palestine, Kashmir, and we can look at all places where human beings have destroyed the lives of others, and even what is happening within some of the countries where the rich and powerful elites are subjugating the masses and treating them like a herd of sheep. Why do they do that? And that is important. This verse has, we have to go through it few times and trying to understand that why it is worded like this. We must not let our minds remain confined to the past, as the Quran is reporting to us for all times that if we do not follow the laws of Allah and do not establish the system of Deen, then the same fate of Bani Israel will arrive, and we simply cannot stop it by our supplications and rituals. I didn't want to go into more graphic details of this verse, but we can discuss it under question and answer session. Few more reflections on this verse, 17:5. This aspect of the decline and ruin of nations as per the law of requital is referred to in various verses in the Quran. For example, in verse 47:38, Quran says, لِتُنْفِقُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَمِنْكُمْ مَنْ يَبْخَلُ وَمَنْ يَبْخَلْ فَإِنَّمَا يَبْخَلُ عَنْ نَفْسِهِ. When invited to make wealth and possessions available in the path of Allah, some among you hold back, but any who hold back do it at the expense of their own self. Remember, at the moment, each one of us enters into a covenant with Allah, and we have gone through this aspect previously as well and discussed verse 911. Then it states the consequence of it. وَإِن تَتَوَلُّوا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. And Quran says, if you do not make an effort to establish the system of Deen and then do not put in your best in terms of your possessions and your own life and your own hard work into it, then what will happen is, if you turn back, then He will substitute in your place another nation. They will not be like you. They could be worse or could be better. And we can see that there is no Jamaat-e Momineen around in this world. So if one nation is replaced by another, I don't think it will be any better than the previous one. This new nation will not replace you peacefully. It cannot, as it is non-Quranic, and we can see what is happening in the Middle East. They all recite these verses. Many remember these by heart. Here we need to reflect hard to figure out the issue of the human psyche, which fails to come to grips with something which has become so obvious on this platform. Then we need to remember, وَمَنْ كَانَ فِي هَذِهِ أَعْمَى فَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ أَعْمَى. If we turn blind eye to these things in this world, and even despite reading the Quran, we do not understand these issues, then according to the Quran, we are blind. Those who are blind here will be blind in the hereafter. The Quran provides a prescription to treat this blindness. And regarding this verse, there is another important point which we may like to discuss during our question answer session. Then the verse concludes with another extremely powerful statement of the Quran, i.e. Wakana Wadan Maf'ula. This is the promise of Allah as per the law to be fulfilled, and it was carried out then and is being carried out today. The same is going to be enacted very soon, as we can see the state of the world. Where is the evidence for it? Just listen to all the Muslims on the media across the world. Does anyone even mention these verses from the Quran? Now, next verse 17:6, understanding the human world leads to its successes. Summa radadna lakumul karrata alayhim wa amdadnakum bi amwalin wa banina wa ja'alnakum aksara nafira. You learned lessons from this then. That is, after the first destruction, they learned a lesson. We changed the circumstances in such a way that these became favorable to you and went against your enemies. That is, Zulkarnain defeated the Babylonians and settled you once again in your land. We shouldn't forget that Bani Israel must have made a lot of effort to come out of it, because they must have learned a lesson from their previous ruin. In this way, we aided you through the abundance of wealth and possessions and numerous progeny. and as a consequence, your nation became very numerous and strong. You became a great nation again. Nations can rise from their ashes by following the laws of Allah. Here in the verse, it is pointed out that after the first destruction and humiliation, Bani Israel possibly learnt their lesson and recovered from this state of theirs, and made efforts and mended their ways. As a result, they multiplied in numbers, recovered from the loss of their people, and also added to their wealth. This prosperity lasted a few centuries as per the available history. The Quran tells us that the door of Tawbah is always open to us. We have gone through this aspect under Surah Nahl. For a nation which wishes to recover from their self-created decline and ruin before the term of respite ends. The Quran here does not state whether this prosperity of theirs was under the guidance of Wahi or was an economic recovery and the gaining of strength militarily, i.e., a part of the process of physical laws. They definitely flourished in the land, and historically it looks as if they got back into Jerusalem and lived there under better conditions after their previous destruction. However, they gradually fell into decline again by adopting the previous path of transgression. Let us go to the next verse, 17:7. The second transgression also led to their destruction. In asantum le anfusikum wa in asaltum falaha faiza jaa wadul akhirate le yasu'u wujuhakum wa le yadkhulul masjida kama dakhaluhu awwala marrate wa le yutabbiru ma alaw tatbira. In this way, you witnessed how, when you lived life according to the laws of Allah in a balanced way, your condition became prosperous, and when you adopted imbalances against it, then its calamitous consequences also descended on you. This is our law of requital. Then when the second event took place, then under Titus we made the Romans stand up against you, so that they humiliate and disgrace you and enter Hackle in such a way, just as the first entry was made by the Babylonians. And see over here, the translation Hackle, if we look at it, it is masjid. And whatever fell into their grip, they destroyed it completely. Further elaboration of this verse states that the permanent value of manifesting balanced conduct will lead to a balanced society, that is, balanced selves. And if people start to commit wrongs, then deterioration will set in. The issue for us is that why do people resort to obvious wrongs and give up the previous path of good? The Quran has pointed to the cause by stating promote good and forbid evil. Educate and train every member in society to practice this so that the law of requital functions among people on a 24/7 basis. This needs to be also practiced by us in our families. On the second occasion, Bani Israel again degenerated, and as a consequence, the stronger people overpowered them. Because obviously, if human beings in some Islamic society, or even in a normal non-Islamic society, if people do not promote good, whatever they think good, and do not forbid evil, then gradually cancer sets in and things go bad to worse. The stronger people overpowered them and entered their land and uprooted them, which led to their ruin and humiliation. The verse here refers to their hackle, calling it masjid, i.e., seat of power, is being entered and destroyed. It takes centuries for nations to keep doing injustice before their demise arrives. We can see there is a big gap between the two destructions. That means they acquired some ascendancies, they acquired power in the land, and then they started declining because of not following the values of Wahi. The capital, the center of power, the pharaoh, etc. are the symbols of power of a nation. It is the Qibla of a nation, and when it is occupied, whether physically or ideologically or both, then nations cease to be of any consequence in the arena of life in this world. This is why the Quran puts repeated emphasis on ideology and its impact on the human psyche. We remember that the Quran says that state of a nation does not change until the time they change their own inner psyche, because outer world is essentially a reflection of our own psyche. Next verse, 17:8, which is the last verse for today's presentation. The Quran provides guidance on prosperity and growth in this life for nations. Asa rabbukum an yarhamakum wa in uttum udna wa ja'alna jahannama lil kafirina hasira. Your life of humiliation is continuing until the present time. But even now, if you desist and adopt the straight path in the company of our messenger who has arrived in Madina, then your Rabb will bestow means of nourishment on you. This is important that we should look at the purpose of life through the lens of the Quran and then see that whether our life is in line with that or not. Because ideology is extremely important for the development of self. Because ideology is the one through which we gain direction in life, that which path we wish to follow. But if you do the same with him as you used to do with your Anbiya, then you will receive the same punishment as you have received twice before. You have seen how we have made Jahannam as the place of stagnancy for those people who refuse to tread on the correct path, i.e., their potentials to advance forward become eliminated and they remain stagnant at the same place. This is what is called the destruction of nations. Because life is about moving forward, developing forward, growing, and getting the best out of our life, both at the physical level as well as at the self's level. And if we do not, then we are essentially stagnant in this life, because if we are not developing like industrially, then we are physically stagnant. And if we are intellectually backward and at the same place and going around in circles and caught in the quagmire of religious rituals and false beliefs like Kismat and Takdir, then essentially we are living dead. Further reflections. After a reminder about the past, here the Quran has provided guidance on the aspect of regaining glory and success in life. And Quran calls it Rahmat through Rububiyat, for which the Momineen of the earlier era of Islam had stood up and had succeeded in establishing the system of Deen. So for us as students of the Quran, if human beings in the past have done it once, then we can repeat it. We can do it as well. And in any case, Quran repeatedly tells us that you should become an ummah in yourself, just like Messenger Ibrahim, and follow the examples of all the messengers who are quoted in the Quran. And if they could be successful, so can we be, because we are also human beings like them. The addressee over here can be the Jews who were residing in Medina at that time. And this is important that we should not too much concentrate on Jews and Bani Israel, because issue is not what happened in the past. The issue is what is happening right in front of our own eyes. And what are we going to do with the rest of our life? Do we spend our life as part of the man-made system and accept it willingly and get its benefit and then die? Or do we want to bring change within us so that our outlook, our vision changes and we can see the reality as the Quran wishes us to see and then do something about it? And inviting them to rationally go through the message of the Quran put forward by the last messenger, and then to look at their own history and conduct from the past and to accept it. This will open the door of prosperity and past glory, which had given them the status of chosen people. And if we remember, Quran has very clearly said, for example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 134, that these are the people who passed away. You will not be asked what they did. You'll be asked what you are going to do with your life, because your life, physical life, is going to come to an end with your death. This also cautions the Momineen that this is equally applicable to them and to the whole of mankind. Whoever follows the laws of Allah will prosper and flourish and will see no decline, as long as they remain on this well-lit path by the Quran. However, if people decide to go against his laws, i.e., who become kafireen, they will create hell for themselves in this world, and which will never leave them alone for eternity. It covers every aspect of human life. And over here, I added this slide with a view to really compare two kinds of mentalities, schematic of human psyche, the nature of its contents. First is, here we witness human mind being occupied by the psyche which his environment creates. For example, parents, schooling, society, nation, and world in which he is born. That is, we have to see that who is creating our psyche. Are we the master of this psyche, or somebody else is creating for us? This psyche is the abode of religious beliefs, family values, social values, success definitions based on material outlook, basic emotive proclivities like prejudices, jealousies, hate, vengeance, envy, sympathy, empathy, selfishness. We can include all our good and bad emotions into it, mostly our negative emotions which arise in our mind without our creating them. Accountability, etc., do not attract serious attention. Own desires take priority, living life as if it ends with physical death. And we can see this kind of mentality. And those of us who have come to the Quran and made an effort on this, we can relate to our previous mentality as well. Next is, this includes all that is noted in the previous box. So this is over and above this. This is a secular psyche which is firmly embedded in this assumption that human life ends with physical death. Because over here, religious beliefs, they put a veil, some kind of a cover over this fact. And as a result, we think that we will be able to make it for the life of the hereafter because we leave it to our own concept of God, that this God which we have created as a dictator, that it is up to his forgiveness. And if we keep doing these religious rituals, somehow we will become forgiven, and not realizing that there is a law of requital works within ourselves. So that is important to understand between these two psyches. And over here, they delude themselves that somehow they will have a life in the hereafter, which is dependent on the mercy, inverted commas, of God. This psyche functions behind all the man-made systems where ultimate authority to make laws rests with either one human being or a bunch of human beings at the top. And this is the state of the world as of January 2024. Previous plus this mentality lead to creating problems in the world, and some of these mentalities then come up with solutions to solve these created problems. This process of creating and solving problems continues, and as a result, mankind intellectually and morally doesn't move forward. And that is why we can see the wars and conflicts keep increasing with every passing day. And now we have to cross this barrier of dotted line and go to the other side, and we know how to do it because as being students of the Quran. This is an acquired mentality by those who are looking for guidance. Very important. If we are not looking for guidance, even if we are reading the Quran, studying the Quran, day and night reading it and even reciting it, even if we memorize it completely from beginning to the end, it will make no difference. We will still remain unguided. Not being satisfied with the man-made systems, they question its man-created problems and look for an alternative. And that is the crux of it. We have to be dissatisfied with the man-made system and the problems it creates, the yatim and miskeen it creates, wars it creates, and conflicts it creates. They acquire Iman as per the guidance of Wahi, the Quran, learn about the permanent values and the system of Rububiyyat Deen. And of course, there's a lot of effort involved over here. Many years of effort. It's not a one-day's job, because whatever we learn from the Quran, then we have to go out in the practical world, observe what others are doing, and then practice it as well, as much as possible within the constraints of the man-made system. This psyche is the abode of total Iman and keeps developing through Saleh deeds. So this is something which is important to understand, because if we do not understand, then we become carried away by the events around us. This half-hearted approach doesn't work with the Quran. We have to be either committed fully to it or just leave it alone. And when we are ready, only then come to the Quran. And thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts, and you may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of Deen. Thank you.